Minister Lawrow, thank you for doing this.
Started the war, Putin repeatedly said that we started the operation in order to end the war, which Kiev regime was conducting against its own people in the parts of Donbass. Just in his latest statement, the president clearly indicated that we are ready for any eventuality, but we strongly prefer peaceful solution through negotiations on the basis of respecting legitimate security interests of Russia and on the basis of respecting the people who live in Ukraine, who still live in Ukraine being Russians, and their basic human rights, language rights, religious rights have been exterminated by series of legislation passed by the Ukrainian parliament, and they started long before the special military operation. Since 2017, legislation was passed prohibiting Russian education in Russian, prohibiting Russian media operating in Ukraine, then prohibiting Ukrainian media working in Russian language, and the latest, of course, there were also steps to cancel any cultural events in Russian. Russian books were thrown out of libraries and exterminated. And the latest was the law prohibiting canonic Orthodox Church, Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And you know, it's very interesting when people in the West say we want this conflict to be resolved on the basis of the UN Charter and respect for territorial integrity of Ukraine, Russia must withdraw. The Secretary General of the United Nations says similar things. Recently, his representative repeated that the conflict must be resolved on the basis of international law, UN Charter, General Assembly resolutions, while respecting territorial integrity of Ukraine. It's a misnomer, because if you want to respect the United Nations Charter, you have to respect it in its entirety. And the United Nations Charter, among other things, says that all countries must respect equality of states and the right of people for self-determination. And they also mentioned the United Nations General Assembly resolutions, and this is clear that what they mean is the series of resolutions which they passed after the beginning of the special military operation, and which demand condemnation of Russia, Russia get out of Ukraine territory in 1991 borders. But there are other United Nations General Assembly resolutions which were not voted, but which were consensual. And among them is a declaration on principles of relations between states on the basis of the Charter. And it clearly says, by consensus, everybody must respect territorial integrity of states whose governments respect the right of people for self-determination, and because of that, represent the entire population living on a given territory. To argue that the people who came to power through military coup d'etat in February 2014 represented Crimeans or the citizens of eastern and southern Ukraine is absolutely useless. It is obvious that Crimeans rejected the coup. They said, leave us alone, we don't want to have anything with you. So did Donbass. Crimeans held referendum and they rejoined Russia. Donbass was declared by the putschists who came to power a terrorist group. They were shelled, attacked by artillery. The war started, which was stopped in February 2015. And the Minsk agreements were signed, and we were very sincerely interested in closing this drama by seeing Minsk agreements implemented fully. it was sabotaged by the government which was established after the coup d'etat in Ukraine. There was a demand that they enter into a direct dialogue with the people who did not accept the coup. There was a demand that they promote economic relations with that part of Ukraine, and so on and so forth. None of this was done. The people in Kyiv were saying we would never talk to them directly, and this is in spite of the fact that the demand to talk to them directly was endorsed by the Security Council. And they said they are terrorists, we would be, fighting them, and they would be dying in cellars because we are stronger. Had the coup in February 2014, had it not happened, and had the deal which was reached the day before between the then president and the opposition implemented, Ukraine would have stayed one piece by now with Crimea in it. It's absolutely clear. They did not deliver on the deal, instead they staged the coup. The deal, by the way, provided for creation of a government of national unity in February 2014 and holding early elections, which the then president would have lost. Everybody knew that. But they were impatient, and they took the government buildings next morning. They went to this Maidan Square and announced that they created the government of the winners. Compare the government of national unity to prepare for elections and the government of the winners. How can the people whom they, in their view, defeated, how can they pretend that they respect the authorities in Kyiv? The right for self-determination is the international legal basis for decolonization process, which took place in Africa on the basis of this charter principle, right for self-determination. The people in the colonies, they never treated the colonial powers, colonial masters, as somebody who represent them, as somebody whom they want to see in the structures which govern those lands. By the same token, the people in east and south of Ukraine, people in Donbass and Novorossiya, they don't consider the Zelensky regime. The important thing is to avoid a nuclear war. And it was us, by the way, who initiated in January 2022 the message, the joint statement by the leaders of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, saying that we will do anything to avoid confrontation between us, acknowledging and respecting each other's security interests and concerns. This was our initiative. And security interests of Russia were totally ignored when they rejected, about the same time, when they rejected the proposal to conclude a treaty on security guarantees for Russia, for Ukraine, in the context of coexistence and in the context when Ukraine would not be ever member of NATO or any other military bloc. This security interests of Russia were presented to the West, to NATO and to the United States. In December 2021, we discussed them several times, including during my meeting with Tony Blinken in Geneva in January, late January 2022, and this was rejected. So we would certainly like to avoid any misunderstanding. And since the people, some people in Washington and some people in London, in Brussels, seem to be not very capable to understand, we will send additional messages if they don't draw necessary conclusions.
The fact that we're having a conversation about a potential nuclear exchange and it's real is remarkable. Not something I thought I'd ever see. And it raises the question, how much back-channel dialogue is there between Russia and the United States? Has there been for the last 2.5 years? Is there any conversation ongoing?
There are several channels, but mostly on exchange of people who served terms in Russia and in the United States. There were several swaps. There are also channels which are not advertised or publicized, but basically the Americans send through these channels the same message which they send publicly. You have to stop, you have to accept the way which will be based on the Ukrainian needs and Ukrainian position. They support this absolutely pointless peace formula by Zelensky, which was additioned recently by Victory Plan. They held several series of meetings, Copenhagen format, Bürgenstock, what have you, and they brag that next year, first half of next year, they will convene another conference and they will graciously invite Russia that time, and then Russia would be presented an ultimatum. All this is seriously repeated through various confidential channels. Now we hear something different, including Zelensky's statements that we can stop now at the line of engagement, line of contact. Stated that Ukrainians must exterminate Russians through law or, if necessary, physically. Ukrainian former ambassador to Kazakhstan, forgot his name, status for a very tiny part of Donbass, not for the entire Donbass, not for Novorossiya at all. Part of Donbass, under these Minsk agreements endorsed by the Security Council, should have the right to speak Russian language, to teach Russian language, to study in Russian, to have local law enforcement like in the states of US, to be consulted when judges and prosecutors are appointed by the central authority, and to have some facilitated economic connections with neighboring regions of Russia. That's it. Something which President Macron promised to give to Corsica and still is considering how to do this. And when these agreements were sabotaged all along, first by Poroshenko and then by Zelensky, both of them, by the way, came to presidency running on the promise of peace, and both of them lied. So when these Minsk agreements were sabotaged to the extent that we saw the attempts to take this tiny part of Donbass by force, and we, as Putin explained, we have, at that time, we suggested these security arrangements to NATO and the United States, which was rejected. And when the Plan B, joking, but even at the end of Yeltsin's term, he started to contemplate that this was not something she wanted for Russia. And I think this was very obvious when he appointed Putin prime minister and then left earlier and blessed Putin as his successor for the elections which were coming and which Putin won. But when Putin became president, he was very much open to cooperation with the West. And he mentions about this quite regularly when he speaks with interviewers or at some international events. I was present when he met with George Bush Jr., with Obama,